wish to be sworn or affirmed for the record?
Sworn, please.
Today's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
So, Prime Minister, we'll start with the typical routine housekeeping. Mr. Clerk, can I ask you to pull up WIT 66, please? Prime Minister, you'll recall being interviewed by Commission Counsel on February 27th, 2024?
Yes.
Can you confirm that you've reviewed the summary of that interview, that the summary is accurate, and that you adopt it as part of your evidence before the Commission?
I can.
Thank you. The next is WIT 67, please, Mr. Clerk. So, Mr. Prime Minister, this is the summary of your in-camera examination. You'll recall having been examined in camera by Commission Counsel earlier this year?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and once again, can you confirm that you've reviewed the summary, that the summary is accurate, and that you adopt it as part of your evidence for the Commission?
I can.
Perfect. We can take that down now, Mr. Clerk. So I'm going to ask you to start today, Prime Minister, by asking a pretty general question, but nevertheless a fundamental one, which is, having been Prime Minister now since 2015, can you paint for the Commission a picture of the foreign interference landscape over your tenure as Prime Minister? And before you answer, I'll just put two sort of precisions on that. One is that we know foreign interference comes in all shapes and sizes, but the kind of foreign interference that interests us most today at this Commission is obviously foreign interference as an institutions. Second, all questions I pose to you, please stick to information.
That we had grown concerned about as a party when we were in opposition before the 2015 election was the lack of oversight by parliamentarians into what was going on in our national security universe in this country. Example of the wasn't a process whereby parliamentarians of different parties, of opposition parties, could examine top secret material was seen as a lacking that Canada had, certainly compared to our other Five Eyes partners, which is why in our 2015 campaign platform, we committed to creating a National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, whereby parliamentarians of all different parties would be sworn into the highest levels of clearance to be able to oversee, verify, and ascertain that everything that our national security agencies were doing was, on the one hand, compliant with Canadian values, rules, and the Charter, and on the other hand, doing everything necessary to keep Canadians safe. So we started in 2015 with a commitment to strengthen our national security institutions. We did that by the creation of National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. We also combined a number of oversight organizations into NSIA, which is a more judicial or academic or high-level oversight of our national security agencies, as well as, as we began to govern, strengthened our various national security and intelligence agencies and changed our national security advisor to a national security and intelligence advisor, because it's not just about security, and obviously the work around intelligence was getting more and more complex and important in part of keeping Canadians safe. Over the course of that first mandate, we witnessed the significant foreign interference allegations or threats during the 2016 presidential election in the United States, where Russia, certainly through misinformation and disinformation online, attempted to interfere. But also, more interestingly, as a key example, in 2017, during the French presidential election, there was actually a moment moment in which officials within the French governmental apparatus actually had to come out and tell the citizens of France that a particular piece of information or news that was about to break was in fact Russian disinformation and should not be given any weight or heed. That got us to reflecting on whether or not Canada had a potential to intercede in an election campaign if there was a significant threat of foreign interference impacting the ability in a fair way. So we got them here in Canada, which ended up being two mechanisms. Task force that allows our security agencies to monitor very closely the goings-on in the election, and the panel of five, which is top civil servants who would have the ability, if they deemed it necessary, to actually go public or take other actions to ensure the protection of our democratic institutions and electoral process. One of the other examples of things that we've when Canada hosted the G7 leaders, actually brought forward and created the G7 Rapid Response Mechanism, which was designed to monitor and respond to threats of misinformation and disinformation in our democracies, a tool that has been in a number of different occasions, and indeed was more recently actually strengthened to weigh in a little more on the democracies in Eastern Europe, where we're seeing significant interference by Russians, given the conflict in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you for that summary. What I'm going to try and get at now is the threats, really, to which all of this responds. So we heard from Minister Gould this morning about the plan to protect Canada's democracy and what it was really designed to do, that process. Mr. Clerk, I'm going to ask you to pull up a document, CAN 019496. So, of information, or at least that was available to you at that time, and that's what I'm going to bring out here. So this is a memo that was written to you by David Morrison, your NSIA at the time, and you received it in June 2017. So the top of that document there talks about the Chinese foreign interference threat, and it says, the CSIS describes the PRC essentially as sophisticated, pervasive, persistent. There are other countries around, but the PRC is the big one. Mr. Clerk, if you can just scroll down a little bit more. Okay, scroll down, I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going. Okay, there we go. So on the third page here, you'll see Prime Minister, it talks about allies who are facing similar challenges and refers specifically to Australia, in which I believe what's explained there is in Australia it was found that agents of the Chinese government were donating millions of dollars across the political spectrum. So your NSIA is informing you of this. And keep scrolling down, please, Mr. Clerk, to the next page. And then brings it back to Canada. Scroll down a little bit more, please, Mr. Clerk, till the next page. PCO comments. There we go. Okay, last page. Politicians and elected officials, in particular at the provincial, territorial, and municipal levels, are largely This is a very sensitive issue, and public efforts to raise awareness should remain general and not single out specific countries to avoid potential bilateral incidents. However, countries across the line should be reminded of appropriate conduct and risk of consequences. So, Mr. Prime Minister, I'd like you to speak to those points if you can. First of all, the level of knowledge coming from the PRC, and also that foreign interference, while at the same time,
Well, first of all, it's a good example as I spoke about the experiences in the United States and in France. The experience that Australia had, not with Russia, but with China, is another excellent example that we were very aware of at the time, and highlighted the fact that there are foreign state actors who are interested in playing a role in our democracies or in disrupting our democracies. The difference between Russia and China is a significant one in that China has a very large diaspora of Chinese Canadians who are often the first targets of interference efforts by a foreign state, by that foreign state. So we were very aware of it. As a politician in Canada for 8 years when I became Prime Minister, I was certainly aware of the various ways officials and different countries, particularly Canadian political processes, but in 2015, maybe into 2016, our national security officials, some of the things understood as opposition politicians now in a position of being in government, that we wanted to understand more about the role of communities, and we even wanted to know about particular individuals that we had heard things about, and understand what land, because we suddenly had access to a very sophisticated and excellent national security apparatus that when one is a simple opposition politician, you don't have access to. So from the very beginning, we knew there were things we needed to know about. This 2017 memo is certainly a continuation of that level of awareness. The issue of it being a sensitive issue is quite germane, and it evolves over time. Back in the early days of our government, we were very much looking to deepen the trade and commercial ties with China, seeing it as an opportunity for exports. One of my biggest files of the day on that was trying to restore the canola shipments that many Western grain farmers were relying on, that were seeing irregular blockages from the Chinese authorities. So that was part of our work. But even as we were doing that, we were very aware of the areas in which we needed to challenge or contest China, whether it was on issues of human rights or democracy, of Uyghurs, of our diaspora communities from they chose to arbitrarily detain two Canadians close to 3 years. We were back hard against China on the tensions and the fact that they needed to release those two Canadians. But we were extremely active around the world in mobilizing other countries to bring up Canada and the plight of the two Michaels during their bilateral conversations, which was something I can say ended up putting a significant amount of strain on our relationship because it was a massive irritant to China that everyone kept talking about these two Michaels, even when they didn't have anything to do with Canada. We heard it regularly, but that was what we continue to do. It perhaps came to the greatest sort of head in terms of being reminded of appropriate contact.
C'est-à-dire que cela nous rappelait les contacts appropriés et les conséquences possibles.
Saw the President of China, Xi Jinping, at the opening ceremonies, I mentioned to him that I needed China to stop interfering in Canadian democratic processes, because that was very much something that people were very concerned about back home.
We'll move then to the picture of, to some more precise questions. Je vais commencer en français, monsieur, maintenant. Et on va parler d'un sujet.
So now let's move. It has to do with the way that you receive information, intelligence information. Now, in your interview and previous testimony, the written documents were not necessarily a reflection of the information you received. And in fact, it's the main part of your briefings. Can you explain that to us and the way you receive the information you need? Well, first of all, any Prime Minister receives countless briefings, receives countless information not only on foreign interference or national security issues, but on the economy or public security issues, concerns shared by allies. I am constantly in receiving mode of all kinds of information from departments and advisors across government. I, of course, also follow the headlines to know what Canadians are reading about, hearing about, what they are concerned about in their daily lives. Now, all of this information is presented in different ways, but despite the fact that I receive written information, briefs on intelligence, the only make me aware of a priority issue is I'm traveling, or if I'm particularly is the best way to convey information to me is to receive a direct briefing from my national security advisor and intelligence advisor. Updates, usually on several topics, during a same session, and this would happen on a regular basis. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's only 3 or 4 times a month. It all depends. But the only way to guarantee, to make sure that I receive the necessary information is to give me an in-person briefing or over a secure line, if necessary, on any issue or priority issue. Now, you mentioned the NSIA, so the National Security and Intelligence Advisor. Is this the person you depend on the most to provide you with the information you need in this area, or do you get the information from the clerk or from both? Well, in that particular field, it is the NSIA to keep me fully briefed on everything I need to know and to answer any questions I might have about security or intelligence. So she is the person I turn to get the answers I need. The clerk often has a role to play to bring priority issues to my attention. It could be security or intelligence issues, but it's mostly the NSIA who is mandated with keeping me fully briefed on security and intelligence issues. When you receive that, I ask you to explain to us how you respond, how you react. Can you tell us? Chief of Staff, Ms. Telford, yesterday testified that she received some information or security or intelligence products with a certain degree of reserve and does not necessarily take the information at face value. Sometimes the information might be erroneous, and I would like to know what you think about that based on your experience. Well, in politics, there is a principle, especially for those who are giving briefing or passing along information to a minister or to the Prime Minister, that if you are not sure about what you are conveying, you might not want to convey it. You cannot give a minister or the Prime Minister wrong information before they rise in the House or speak publicly. This could be very problematic. So when I receive information on an incident which has occurred or on any kind of concern or on a natural disaster or an issue Canadians need to deal with, well, the veracity of the information, the accuracy of the information, its completeness is very important. However, I would make an exception with regard to intelligence. When you receive intelligence, it's not legal circles, it's well known that the difference between those two issues. So when I receive a briefing, whether it's in writing or more frequently verbally, officials, the reliability of the information being said. For instance, when I was briefed on the fact that Iran had shot down a Ukrainian airline on which 100 Canadians were on board, the first reports were a little more vague. However, they told me they had indications that A, B, or C. And then at the next briefing, there was a lot more information. They knew that Iranian armed forces had shot down that Ukrainian aircraft. So what I am saying is that you have to take this intelligence, you have to take this information with a certain awareness that it still needs to be confirmed, or it might not be 100% accurate because it is very sensitive information. Receive a report on Canada's unemployment rate or inflation rate. So there is a certain degree, I would not say skepticism, but of critical thought that must be applied to any information.
I'm going to take you to the 20. Pull up CAN 005461, please. So, Prime Minister, this is, while it's getting pulled up, yep, there it is. We know at this point in the evidence before the gave a briefing to the security cleared representative of the Liberal Party about foreign interference in the Don Valley North riding. We also know from Mr. Broadhurst that he then received that information. How did this play out from your perspective?
Late in September, as I was coming through Ottawa, I believe I was on my way out across the country for another stretch of campaigning. I believe it was on a Sunday as I was heading out after Saturday with my family. Mr. Broadhurst met me at the airport in a holding room in a lounge on the government side of the airport, government terminal in the airport, to let me know of concerns that he had received from the site task force and CSIS about the nomination campaign, the nomination election, the nomination race contest in Don Valley North. He shared with me that intelligence services had shared with him concerns, had developing plans to possible interference in the nomination contest, specifically by mobilizing buses filled with, and the challenge in this is always trying to pick out what I heard exactly then from what I knew later, but I believe it was either buses full of students or buses filled with Chinese speakers or Chinese diaspora members who would be mobilized to support Han Dong, who would have been mobilized to support Han Dong in that nomination contest of a few weeks previous. In what ended up being probably a 20-minute to half-hour conversation with Mr. Broadhurst, I asked him more specifically about, okay, so they had plans or an intent or a capacity to do this. Do we know that they did? Did you hear from CSIS and the security agencies that this was actually done? They weren't entirely certain. There was reasons to believe that perhaps it has, and perhaps the indication was that there were buses that nomination contest. I ask, of course, those who are in politics and certainly on the ground riding politics know that it is regular for buses to be student groups, a particular full of seniors to participate in a nomination contest. So just the existence of buses wasn't enough. Buses with Chinese speakers or Mandarin speakers in them wasn't enough to be itself alarming or a condemnation, but it was. There were clear indications that there were concerns by CSIS that China and that those students or those individuals on the bus might have been motivated or mobilized to vote in that way, and there were concerns that CSIS had. I asked the extent to which they were certain that it happened, the extent to which they were certain that China was indeed behind the mobilizing of the bus or buses. And I also asked whether or not CSIS had information that Han Dong knew about this, whether he was witting and aware that China had mobilized, or Chinese officials had mobilized buses for him or not. And the answers were not clear from CSIS at that point, according to what Mr. Broadhurst told me. I then I also asked if it was a close nomination, if there was a sense that the actual result of the nomination could have been affected by this bus or buses or what was there, and that wasn't clear at all. CSIS didn't have any conclusions to share at that point. I asked Mr. Broadhurst whether CSIS was making any recommendations or suggestions as to what we should do with this information. And it was clear to Mr. Broadhurst that this was very much about just letting us know so that we know and could perhaps take any actions that we deemed appropriate, but they weren't going to be recommending for us to take. Also specified that this was secret information that we could not share with the candidate in question, Mr. Dong, or the public at large, in terms of what they were telling us about these concerns and these allegations. I then asked Mr. Broadhurst what the Liberal nominations, particularly contested nominations, had flagged around that nomination contest of a few weeks before. There are party officials that oversee the voting, the registrations, the voting, the processes, the counting. There are lawyers in place overseeing the count. There are possibilities for the losing contestant or contestants to challenge the result if they feel it was unfair. There are many processes because political parties often have some very complex fights around nomination parties, all nomination contests. All political parties are like that. And Mr. Broadhurst assured me that they had looked into, when they heard these allegations or this information from CSIS and CITE, and had no flags on the nomination process. So then I had what was a brief conversation with Mr. Broadhurst after we had established all that, to sort of agree that the threshold for overturning like an official party nomination to find out, particularly during an election, general election, for removal of that candidate. And that was really sort of the binary choice we were placed with in that situation. Acting would be removing Han Dong as our official candidate. The other choice would be not to remove that candidate. Even not having removed that candidate, we would have to revisit. There would be questions we would have to follow up on after the election to properly understand what happened and what the issues or the risks were in this situation. But understanding that the decision to remove someone needed a high threshold, a threshold that, incidentally, I have met and seen many other cases. As Liberal Party leader, I have, on many, many different occasions, had to ask people to step down or step away or desist as candidates for the Liberal Party. Most recently is the last election where we did that in the case of a downtown Toronto riding. But in this case, I didn't feel that there was sufficient or sufficiently credible information that would justify this very significant step as to in these circumstances.
So where does that leave you? Put it as a pretty binary choice there, but you classified information that you can't share. What are you able to do? Where does this leave a political party receiving this information?
After the election, when we were out of caretaker period, where I went back to being primarily Prime Minister and not simply leader of a political party with 338 candidates across the country, I was able to turn to our intelligence agencies and say, we need to know more about this. We need to understand what the context is, because the answers that we get on that will have a bearing on choices we could make in the future, responsibilities for an individual in such a situation.
Okay. I'm going to move on to some other things now because we have a lot to cover in 75 minutes. Et je vois le temps qui coule. Okay, so the next topic then, Mr. Clerk, you can pull this up, CAN 003116, but Prime Minister, I think I can ask you this question without reference to a document. An incident that was reported by the RRM in the 29 election had to do with an article published in the Buffalo Chronicle, some misinformation, false information about you specifically. Is that something that came to your attention in the 2019 election?
No, it did not.
No, it did not. Okay.
Sorry, the engagement of the site task force or the panel or anyone into that issue was not something I was aware of at the time. I was, of course, aware of the quite disgusting false conspiracies or allegations and a significant number of conservative politicians.
Say the apparatus was dealing with it.
I may have been aware of the article. I was certainly aware of the allegations and the accusations that were heinous and untrue in that.
Okay. I think that's probably what we'll cover for 2019, although I do want to pull up CAN 015. Prime Minister, this is the memo from David Morrison. I misspoke earlier. This is January 14th, 2020, I think, when you received this. And it's essentially a report on the 2019 election, not on the outcome of the election, but on the operation of the site task force and the panel. Mr. Clerk, can you scroll down to the third bullet, please?
Actually, could I just quickly look at the box? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the third bullet. Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so what they say here is pre-election intel briefings and monitoring provided a baseline assessment, suggesting that foreign interference would be commensurate to overall interference campaigns, while some instances were noted and some TRM as a threat reduction measure were taken. None of these activities met the threshold. And then, Mr. Clerk, can you keep scrolling down? Next page. Keep going. I'll tell you when to stop. Yep, I think we may, oh no, there we go, okay. It says, as it pertains to FI and as referenced above, despite concerns that Canada would be targeted, and then I'm going to go through this quite quickly, but the assessment is there was no foreign cyber threat activity targeting Elections Canada, no instances of foreign interference in the human space, no significant indications of FI in the FI and GE 2019 below the consistent with the information that was being provided to you about what happened in GE 2019?
Yes, this was a report in January of 2020, so 3 months after the election. I would have already have been briefed multiple times by the clerk and by others that their conclusion was that the elections in 2019 were indeed free and fair, and the outcome was not affected by foreign interference, either overall or in
So now let's leave 2019 and move to the 2021 election. I'm going to ask you about a series of some incidents or events about which the Commission has received information. And I'll do the first one with reference to one of the topical summaries that's been produced to the Commission by the government. So, Mr. Clerk, that's Can Sum 4. The title of this one is a bit of a tongue twister, but Possible People's Republic of China Foreign Interference Related Mis- or Disinformation. So what we have here, if you can scroll down past the caveat page, Mr. Clerk, is a summary of essentially allegations of misinformation about the Conservative Party, its leader, Aaron O'Toole, and I think Kenny Chu is in there as well, that were circulating during the 2021 election. So my question to you, Prime Minister, is this something that you were aware of as it was occurring in 2021?
During the 2021 election, no. Shortly after the 2021 election, when the Conservative Party went public with its concerns in the sort of the week that followed, I learned about it through media reports.
Okay. And were you aware that the Conservative Party had raised those concerns with the government as well?
Not at the time, but later I would learn that through briefings.
Okay.
Months later.
The next one then is, where's the next one? Can Sum 13, please? About both 2019 and 2021, the more germane one may be 2021. Can you scroll down to the information page? Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So what this summarizes, you'll see, is expressions of partisan preferences by certain PRC officials in is that there was reporting that some PRC officials expressed political preferences which were party agnostic and opportunistic at a riding level. So then scrolling down, please, again, Mr. Clerk, in 2021, there was Canada made comments expressing a preference for a Liberal Party minority government. The rationale was they don't perceive any of the political parties as being particularly pro-China, but perceived minority governments as being more limited in terms of enacting anti-China policies. So this reporting of an expressed preference by certain PRC officials for a Liberal minority, was that something of which you were aware at the time?
No. As I said, both the 2019 and 2021 elections happened in a context of significant tensions between our government and the government of the People's Republic of China, particularly over the illegal and arbitrary detention of 2 Canadian citizens, the 2 Michaels. We were extremely active both in pushing back at Chinese officials on this issue, but also, as I said, active around the world in drumming up support for people for different countries for the 2 Michaels, but also arbitrary detention and how it shouldn't be used as a tool of political. So, you know, I can. Consistently would get is that the actual no just would seem very improbable that itself would have a preference in the election.
So I take it from this that whatever intelligence reporting there was on that, it did not reach your ears. That down now, Mr. Clerk.
And there's also the issue of the difference between foreign interference and attempts by different countries to influence behavior. Diplomats around the world are in their roles to try and influence favorable behaviors by the countries in which they're serving towards the country they represent. That is a big part of the role of a diplomat, of a foreign official, of all types. Canadians certainly take an active role in furthering our interests, including from time to time having certain preferences around what might happen or might be an outcome of an election or a particular domestic debate in a foreign country. However, foreign interference happens when there's a full proper definition of it somewhere, but my understanding is where it's covert, where it's coercive, where it is using pressure or particularly untoward means other than having express, I really hope you should sign this trade deal, means to get them to sign said trade deal, or to express a preference, or what have you, is not in itself foreign interference. It may be attempts at influence. It may not be anything other than the regular concept of diplomacy.
So further their preference that would constitute potentially foreign interference.
And certainly in the case of China, we have seen regularly that many examples of this commission that there are clear actions that would amount to or indicate a willingness to engage in foreign interference.
The next incident I want to bring you to is CAN 001082, Mr. Clerk. This is another briefing, Prime Minister, that was given to the cleared representative of the Liberal Party at the time. It's the 2021 election this time. You probably, judging from that document, can't say very much about this, but what I'm interested in knowing here is the timing of how this one played out, again, from your perspective. So we know that the briefing was actually on the 12th of September, I believe, not the 11th, as this document indicates, but it was given again to the Liberal Party representative and then to Mr. Broadhurst, and we've heard Mr. Broadhurst's evidence on it, so now we'd like yours.
My understanding is, which I learned after the election was over, was that Mr. Broadhurst made the determination that it wasn't something that he needed to bring to my attention as leader of the Liberal Party, and he did not. He did not bring it to your attention? He did not bring it to my attention.
During the election?
During the election, yes.
After the election?
More official briefings on this matter.
Okay.
He was the vehicle for officials, because that's the way it would flow through as party leader, in my party leader role. Prime Minister, it was officials who would be able to brief me on this.
Okay. Speaking of briefings, we're going to turn to that topic. You, or we think you received, we do know you, over the relevant time period. I'll start with February 9th, 2021. This one I don't really have a document to point you to, so I'm just going to ask you for your recollection of it. So this would be, again, February 9th, 2021. Do you recall receiving a briefing on that date?
Yes, that was a briefing that I got on the phone. I was not in person for that briefing. I was there via teleconference on a secure phone, and yes, I got a briefing.
Okay. Do you recall the content of that briefing at all?
It was as I recall, a general briefing on a number of issues, including foreign interference.
Okay. The next one then in time, Mr. Clerk, can you pull up CAN 0? Okay, this document, which has been talked about quite a bit in these proceedings, is briefing notes. Again, can you scroll down just so the Prime Minister can see a bit of the document and its content? So Prime Minister's briefing in the fall of 2022, October 27th.
The place where I got the briefing, so I remember very clearly this briefing. This briefing was actually cases and situations to do with federal elections.
Okay, so would you say that the content of this particular, these notes, these briefing notes, accurately conveys what you were told during that briefing?
Not particularly. Obviously, there are elements in this that are consistent with the briefing that was on different elements of foreign interference. But when it comes to briefings, and others can speak to this and how they make decisions about what to read from their prepared notes during an actual briefing with ministers or a prime minister. But it is much more of a that talk about how serious foreign more. That wouldn't have been something that advisors or whoever would have had to spend much time on, because they would have known that we did understand how serious foreign interference is and how much we take it seriously. And actually, that was why we would spend more time that were really the meat of the briefing. Notes are prepared for the briefers. What actually becomes the most important thing that I certainly recall about those briefings was the various and specific cases we went through and how they are examples of concern or not concern, that we then have to behave in certain ways or have follow-ups on this or that. I mean, it is much less a large theoretical briefing and much more concrete. This is a situation, and then the discussion about how we deal with this particular situation or example or another would be where the larger theoretical discussion and implications would come in, but they would be concentrated around specific individuals or cases.
Okay. So maybe we'll pull up now Ms. Telford's notes from that meeting. So that's CAN 009803. A little more sparse than Brian Clowes would be, but at least we have a few points here. Do these notes help shed any light on what was dealt with in that briefing for you, Prime Minister? Do these seem familiar?
Yes, I think the 1, 2, 3 indicates that different examples that we were, or the situations, or actually there are cases that we were talking about, or individuals we were talking about. And the bragging is not doing definitely helps me recall a part of the conversation where there was, and let me be careful how I say this so it's not identifiable. There was a foreign government official based in Canada who was taking credit for a certain thing having happened in Canada in their reporting to a superior or to their home country. And just the fact that a foreign official was taking credit for having delivered a particular outcome in no way meant that anything that particular official did actually created the outcome. Bragging is not doing. So, wanting to write back home to say, we got the outcome we wanted, perhaps, when that individual may not have had any actual bearing on the outcome of the particular event.
Okay.
I don't know if that's sufficiently clear for what it was.
It is, and thank you. The last document maybe on this point, 4097. I'm sorry. No, sorry, 4079. My bad. There we go. Okay, so again, these are notes from that day. So if you can have a quick look at these, Prime Minister. The non-redacted parts of these. And what you'll see there is a text box over information that's been redacted but summarized by the Commission. Does this seem familiar as information that was discussed at that meeting?
During that same October meeting? Sorry, what was that?
Yes.
Actions on a document that I would never have seen.
Fair enough. Okay, next one then is November 30th, 2022. Can we pull up, please, Mr. Clerk, CAN 014285? So this is a memo to you, Prime Minister, of November 30th, 2022. And Mr. Clerk, again, if you can scroll down so the Prime Minister can see the document, pass the transmittal note. It's a memorandum for you by the NSIA, copied to the clerk, claims of foreign interference in the 2019 general election for information. And the context of this, Prime Minister, is this is shortly after the media leaks have started about foreign interference. So a memo was written, and we can again scroll through a bit to see the content of that memo. could just keep going a little faster than that. I'm not really going to stop on anything. But I will ask you now that you've seen it a little bit to just scroll back up to the summary part, Mr. Clerk. Okay. What's happening here is the NSIA and PCO that identified a single PCO 2020, which is the one that we've seen earlier. Briefing. Is that consistent with your recollection of when you were briefed on these issues?
Sorry, is this note of November 30th, 2022 was when we were asked on, what may have happened. And we were asking, were these things that we were flagged at that time? And yes, that's the single PCO information note dated January 24th, 2020.
And then the February 9th, 2021 briefing. So all I'm asking is whether that's consistent with your recollection of when you were briefed on these issues.
But I wasn't. These were requests. I made a request to our National Security and Intelligence Advisor because there were things being alleged in the leaks that we had not been briefed on. So I'm not entirely certain about the briefing dates there given, because there were things, including those 11 candidates as a quote, that we had never been briefed on until we saw the leaks.
Right. So I guess maybe this particular document I'm not asking you about, except of when you were briefed, the January 2020.
January 2020
was the memo that we looked at earlier.
David Morrison memo?
Right.
I got briefed on the contents, which was basically that foreign interference was lower than expected and the elections were free and fair in 2019. Those were the top level conclusions that I was briefed on. 2019 election. By the time we got around to January, it was good to have that report. I ended up reading the Judd report, I believe, was the full assessment of the work that the panel did during the 2019 election, but I did not read that. I did not receive that January 24th note because I'd already been briefed on its entire contents.
Okay.
And then the February 9th, 2021, what note was that? Was the phone brief that we spoke about earlier? Yes.
Right. I guess that goes back to your point about oral briefings are what really get to you, not necessarily the written ones. Okay. Can we then pull up, Mr. Clerk, CAN 017673?
And let me just, I mean, I wouldn't want to give people the impression that briefings weren't something particularly, intelligence briefings we took very, very seriously. In most of these secure briefings, which would go into a SCIF, a secure compartmentalized room, we were told to leave our Fitbits, make sure we're totally secure within a fair. Often being told, no, we can't documents that are given, but we then need to return them to the officials. Certainly in the beginning, we were never clear on whether we could take notes on this either, because security was important for Brian Cloud does take notes, but that there was lots of written material and lots of tracking of that information, as a government must, in taking very seriously all these things and very careful controls. But when it came to briefing and taking actions and understanding the context, it happened through secure briefings and conversations that were primarily us receiving information, us asking questions, us directing further actions or research in this area or that area that they would then take away and do. I wouldn't want anyone to think that, oh, because the briefings were primarily oral, or, for example, that David Morrison memo I didn't read because it wasn't delivered to me, because I got the content in the fact that the election was integrity.
We'll just go to some other notes then. I believe do you recall this?
My notes indicate that this was immediately before question period, a briefing that happened over lunch hour as I was preparing to go in to deal with some fairly intense questioning on the issue of foreign interference, given the explosive nature of the media stories stemming from unsubstantiated and uncorroborated intelligence shared by a leaker. So these were, these were conversations around what I could say and what we could and couldn't say around some of these allegations that were in the paper, but would leave us limited on rebut, regardless of the fact that there were inconsistencies, there were uncorroborated information in the leaks. There were also things that were flat out wrong. But I was reminded of the old story of some FBI agent questioning a witness in an organized crime situation, saying, well, did you meet with that mobster in LA? The guy says, I can't comment. Did you meet with that mobster in Detroit? I can't comment. Did you meet with that mobster in Miami? No, I definitely did not. Sometimes in denying something, you're giving information that you couldn't. And throughout my preoccupation and why these leaks was that we couldn't actually correct affirming the tradecraft and the work that women and men in upon by our security agencies to keep them at risk without sharing with some of the information or the methods that we use to keep Canadians safe. And that's part of the reason for the complex nature of a public of foreign interference, that if we say certain things or if we contradict or deny other things, we could be giving our adversaries tools to actually understand how we go about detecting their interference or illicit ways of engaging to harm Canadians.
It's a complex problem. So the next, I'm going to keep going with the briefings and the post-leak world briefings specifically, Prime Minister. not long left, but CAN 018009. So these are notes from the date on the notes is March 19th, but we know it was actually March 20th. So this is March 20th, 2023, a meeting at which you were present, and I believe your staff was present, and a number of senior national security officials. So if we scroll down, so content of this document, or the unredacted content of what was happening at this meeting.
To, a little higher. PM, that's me. Speaking of nominations, we were talking about, thank you for we were talking about who the next speaker was. That's redacted. But the emphasis on charter rights, or the bringing up of charter rights, and further down, PM, no June 2019 meeting. Those are two examples of us working constructively with CSIS and the intelligence agencies to better understand and validate certain pieces of information. For example, in the information we were seeing, we'd seen that CSIS had a source that said that there was a June 2019 meeting that I was at that I can clearly and unequivocally at the time and since then confirm never happened. I did not have the meeting that the source had said. Now, this doesn't mean that CSIS got it wrong. It meant that CSIS was now able to validate that what their source had said in this situation was wrong, and therefore that puts a particular understanding or color on their ability to interpret other statements of fact or supposed fact that that source made. And that's part of how intelligence work happens. When you know for sure, when a source says something that you can then verify was wrong, important for us to highlight, for example, in that meeting, that there was no meeting as was described by that source. Similarly, on the question of charter rights, that was a slightly different tweak, where in the CSIS analysis, the analyst had highlighted that there was possible violations of people's charter rights in a particular situation. And we had asked and pressed for more sort of legal or judicial analysis of that assertion within, because it didn't quite ring true to our instincts as political actors in terms of the analysis that CSIS was making. Again, it's part of the process that one goes through as you engage with the experts in foreign intelligence and security in an active way to try and make sure we're understanding, getting the accurate picture, and able to then continue to keep both Canadians and our institutions safe through the various jobs we do.
Madame la Commissaire, I think I'm out of time. Mais vous me permettez une dernière question?
Certainement.
Parfait. Mr. Prime Minister, I'm going to sort of ask you to conclude this.
May I have a last question, Madam Commissioner? Yes.
So we've heard about the existence of foreign interference, the pervasiveness of the threat, and various measures that, as you said, have been put in place to combat this. You may know that earlier in these proceedings, we heard from a number of individuals who being targeted by potential foreign interference in some ways. And there have been calls for the government to do more than it's. And in particular, I'm going to take you, I'll just read you PRC misinformation. He said, it's almost like I was way is to let me know that I'm drowning. I don't need their notification. I need their help. So, Prime Minister, I'd like to hear your response to that. Actually, maybe in providing this response phase of the Commission's work.
A bit of a step back, and the idea that we need to do more. I agree. When we took office in 2015, there was very little, if any, mechanisms to counter foreign interference. Yes, our intelligence agencies did good work, but the idea or the priority of protecting our democracy, particularly when it comes to misinformation, disinformation, active engagement in various diaspora communities or electoral events, was not on the radar at all when we took office. It hadn't been something that the previous government or any previous government had done much on at all. So we started from a standing start. We created the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. We created NSIA. We moved forward with the Rapid Response Mechanism, and we've continued to do more. Yes, the panel for the 2019 and 2021 elections site, but we've continued. We recently brought in a National Security Committee, National Security Council of Cabinet to address sort of strategic tools and powers, and learning from 2019 and 2021 that they'll be able to apply in the 2025 election when it's likely to come. There is always more to do, and one of the things I'm very much looking forward to coming from the work this commission is doing is to make recommendations on how we can strengthen even further the protection of institutions and of our democracy. The other half is in their institutions, in their democracy. And whether it's a diaspora member worried about stepping up to running for elected office in this country because they're worried about the impact that might be real or perceived from a country they chose to leave many years ago for whatever reasons. There are real concerns and feelings involved. And ultimately, democracy only works when people are confident in its ability to keep them safe, but also be the articulation of what they want for their community and their country. That's where confidence in the integrity of the elections in 2019, 2021 is so important, and something that we have emphasized throughout this process, that every briefing I've ever got from all my intelligence and security experts, thing we have seen and heard, despite, yes, states to interfere, feeling that individuals can have that maybe our institutions aren't so strong. Maybe they are impacted by foreign actors who wish to do ill to Canada and to Canadians. Very thoughtful about. And one of the ways ultimately safe is to make sure that citizens themselves active critical thinkers who are empowered to see what is information, what is misinformation or disinformation, and choose whatever direction they want for the country. And we've seen with the intensity of misinformation and disinformation, not just from foreign actors, but just on social media generally in many pockets, that it's not automatic. Democracy requires constant vigilance and constant hard work. It didn't happen by accident, doesn't continue without effort. It's not just effort of commissioners and politicians and spooks. It's efforts of every single individual to feel like they have the full ability to engage in our democratic processes and to feel that they are safe and protected as they engage, whether it's as a voter or a candidate or an elected member of parliament or of provincial parliament or wherever. These are together on, and I am in constant awe across this country who continues to put up their hands. More and more difficult and more challenging discourse to say, no, I want to members of diaspora communities, but of Canadians' experiences is the only way to make sure that we're actually building the kind of country we need to be. Steps up and will continue to commit myself things of safety as we engage as citizens or more as our democracy are protected.
Madame la Commissaire, ce sont mes questions.
Merci.
I have no more question.
À votre connaissance, existe-t-il un mécanisme?
As far as you know, do you have a mechanism or a procedure in place that will ensure that the NSIA would constantly have access and receive information relating to foreign interference? Answer. The NSIA has a role of collecting and looking for all the information available in all of our security agencies, whether it's at the defense level or whether it's at foreign affairs or any other security agency. That is the person who is beside me to coordinate that universe. So she has the capacity and the ability to look for those answers. For example, when I woke up this morning, I saw some reports in the media raising no matter the universe or the place in the security and intelligence universe where information is available, she has access to that universe. She is the person towards which everything questioned. So I understand that she has, whether it's the agencies or the departments and departments transmit information regarding foreign. Sir, I am confident that the information that find relevant, but as we always be improved with respect to how the different departments and the different levels of government work together. And the very existence of the NSIA ensures that we have a point of a connection between authority and gives her a capacity to collect information from everywhere. Question: when you receive information, intelligence that is, that may not have been corroborated as of yet, but that are likely to be very important, that could have a significant impact, could you ask the agencies by setting up a priority list to complete or to follow through with those investigations? Answers: absolutely. And often, and in almost every situation, when I say there's a follow-up on, you should follow up on this, the answer I receive is, we are doing that and this is what we're doing. Of course, the work that the agencies do does not need for a minister to ask for a follow-up. They will follow up on preoccupying situations. Yes, a government or Prime Minister can highlight something, can put pressure to accelerate things or send more resources. But our systems and our agencies in the area of security have the mandates and the responsibilities to follow up on preoccupying situations. Question: so we could you could amend things? Answer: yes. So we would have a regular reflection on our priorities with respect to security for our country. We could lay more emphasis on cybersecurity, for example. When we see what the emphasis was 10 years ago, it's very different. The world is changing. The reality of our world is that the balance of powers are changing. Russia has become extremely problematic, not just mildly problematic as was the case 10 years ago. So we adjust regularly. And elected officials have an important role to play, indeed. But the work that our intelligence and security agencies play is that they work in a robust fashion in general. Question: when your campaign manager that there were allegations Answer: with respect to the party, yes. I first asked, what information do we have in this regard? And I also asked if we could follow up, or at least the party should follow up with Elections Canada and identify the reports that were, see the reports that were written out. What were the conclusions? Do we have additional information? Well, the reality is that in highly contested nomination situations, they are usually bust voters. Sometimes that will be the candidate. And in other situations, you would see buses that belong to an elder person's center, and that would be used by one group or another. And in that case, you might not see receipts being submitted. In my own nomination contest, that was in March or April 2007, there were many buses of Italians and Greeks because that was my reality in Papineau, my riding of Papineau. So that's a common occurrence, and that would not be enough to flag any situation where anybody looking at the nomination contest would say that, no, we have to follow up on that. We are not So we're not a forensic organization. We know that we are limited in what we question. If that was to be revisited. Visit that after the elections? Answer, yes. By the party, I'm sure, yes. There were verifications made, but the verifications were comprehensive, I'm sure of that. Immediately after they were notified by the site task force. I am not sure that there was extensive research that could have lasted months or weeks, because we had only the information that we had and nothing more. If there were maybe an investigation by Elections Canada because of irregularities, there could have been a follow-up, but Elections Canada would be the one to speak on that. To me, the follow-up was at the level of the possible involvement of Chinese authorities here in Canada who would have actively been interested in the nomination contest of a specific candidate. That is where we would have been able to do a follow-up, not necessarily to see what was the truth of what happened during the context, because it's very difficult. We have more clarity that a Chinese authority may have had for a specific candidate.
And so this is the document that we looked at earlier. I took Mr. Broadhurst through it because I wanted to have his evidence about what he told you. And of course, the value of this document is that it sticks to the things that we can talk about in an open proceeding like this. And so I just want to show you the key points. Of course, the first one is that there were allegations of foreign interference by China in the Don Valley North nomination contest. And then secondly, if you just scroll down a little bit, please. This is the redacted bit. Thank you. Oh, sorry. There we are. The summary of the redaction is buses being used to bring international students to the nomination process in support of Han Dong. And I just want to begin by noting that there's nothing language the students were speaking. They're described as international. Noting that is that in your evidence earlier and also you referred to people on the bus, the students, at points Chinese speakers. Do you recall that? I can take you to the passages if you like.
No. No, I appreciate that. One of the challenges that I have is remembering what I knew at a particular years later, I would find out more information about this, means that I'm never 1,000% precise on what it is that I knew at a particular moment.
Yes, I do appreciate that.
I do remember at one point when we were talking about whether or not CSIS understood how nomination races worked and how community organizations would regularly bring buses. There was a quote, or there was someone relayed to me that one of CSIS's concerns was there were buses filled with Chinese speakers showing up at the nomination. And my response, as I sort of alluded to in my previous testimony, was, well, I had buses filled with Greek speakers and Italian speakers because in my nomination in Papineau, those were the communities that were mobilized. That phrase stuck in my head, but I will admit that I do not specifically remember whether or not the Chinese speakers or Mandarin speakers airport briefing, that briefing on this particular Sunday during the campaign, or not.
Yes.
But it certainly is consistent with this.
All right. No, that's very helpful. And I will ask 7 on this. Paragraph 30, which is, Right. Thank you. And so the last sentence is the concern was that buses of Chinese speakers had arrived at the nomination or possibly been brought into the nomination. And then if we go to paragraph 30 and just over the page, the top of the next page, a little further, there we are. Prime Minister, you see the last sentence, the central issue of concern was that buses filled with Chinese speakers could have been international students directed by the PRC. So the point that I want to make with you, Prime Minister, and it sounds to me like perhaps you've already got it, is that the central concern of the service here, as I understand it, is not that they were Chinese speakers. No. It's that they were directed by the PRC. Had these people been students from Switzerland rather than China, but were brought at the behest of China and to do China's bidding, I say the service's concerns would have been absolutely the same, which is that this would be foreign interference.
Yes, entirely. It is not the nature of that. That is part of what I remember as context around the service's concerns that China might have mobilized individuals. Yes.
Thank you. And I appreciate you acknowledging that, and I'll tell you why. And it's because, as you'll recall, there have been times where you have, let us say, cautioned us all as the news about the allegations in Don Valley North came out, and as you have, as I say, let us say, cautioned Canadians not to fall into anti-Chinese or anti-Asian. What I want to press on you here is that the ethnicity or the language of these students has never been the issue either for the service or for any right-thinking Canadian. The concern instead is that PRC was directing people, whoever they were, to go do their bidding and to help Han Dong into his seat in Parliament. And you can have that concern and worry about that and worry about the consequences for our democracy without having an ounce of racial
that I made in response to them saying, or the suggestion that, the concern is the bus filled with Chinese speakers. I say, that has absolutely no bearing on anything.
And I want to be clear, though, I hope it is your evidence that you did not feel that the service itself was acting in some racially prejudiced way.
No, my concern was more that perhaps the service didn't understand as deeply as political actors do the prevalence of busing of different community groups in nomination campaigns.
Right, and let's come to that point as well. If we could go to WIT 66, please. That's your other statement. Paragraph 24, please. Thank you. And actually, it's at the top of page 7, so keep scrolling a little. Yes, stop there. In the middle of the page, Prime Minister, the fact that there were buses of Chinese-speaking people at the nomination meeting did not necessarily corroborate the allegation that the PRC was responsible. And in fact, I should have read you the sentence before as well. He, meaning you, Prime Minister, also remembered that the intelligence was only an allegation, included no evidence that the people being bused at the polls were supported by PRC officials, right? And you go on to say, Prime Minister, that you remembered asking whether the service understood that busing is part of the nomination process. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And again, going back to the reporting I just showed you, there's obviously a reference to busing there. But what I want to suggest to you is that the emphasis, again, wasn't on the mode of travel for these people. They took buses this time, all right. They could have come some other way, and it wouldn't terribly matter for the services perspective because their concern was that they were directed by PRC and assisted in getting to the nomination place in order to, allegedly, help one candidate over another. So the way they got there doesn't matter one way or another. I understand your point that you wanted to make sure that CSIS understood that buses per se are not a problem, but my proposition to you, sir, is that when you read that statement, the emphasis is on direction by China. Yes, they got there by buses. That's the allegation. They could have got there by tricycles. It doesn't terribly matter. The point is they were directed by China.
I would suggest that it might be more difficult for a foreign actor to organize fleets of individuals showing up on tricycles rather than filling.
CSIS would still be concerned, and rightly so.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. I would like to take you to the David Johnson report for a moment now. That's at COM 104. And if you'll go to page 23. Now, I forgot that this is in 2 columns. So I'm not sure where I'm going to find my quote. Let me read it to you. I don't think it's controversial. You may recall that Mr. Johnson, and I hope we can find it in here somewhere, but Mr. Johnson concluded in respect of the Don Valley North allegations, he said that the irregularities were tied to the PRC consulate in Toronto. Do you recall that, sir? I can try to find it for you if you don't.
Yes, there it is. Irregularities were observed.
Yes, and then there we are, and there is, thank you very much, Prime Minister, and there is a well-grounded suspicion that the irregularities were tied to the PRC consulate in Toronto. That's what I wanted to ask you about. Now, I fully appreciate, sir, that that was not a conclusion you were able to make or prepared to make in September 2019. But my question for you is today, now that we've had Mr. Johnson's report and he's come to that conclusion, do you accept, first, that there were irregularities in that nomination contest, and secondly, that they were likely tied to the PRC consulate in Toronto?
I'd suggest that irregularities being observed is not itself enough to overturn a democratic event. That a well-grounded suspicion is certainly warranting more, but also might not necessarily very high threshold for a democratic event.
Yes, but I don't think that's what Mr. Johnson is speaking to. He's just saying that there is a well-grounded suspicion that the irregularities, which he seems to have found, were tied to the consulate. And what I want to know is, do you accept those conclusions today?
Yes, sorry, if you're not asking me about how I accept that there is a suspicion that PRC officials in Canada were engaged in some way with that nomination. I can't speak to irregularities. Perhaps you know what irregularities specifically Mr. Johnson was talking about?
No, not as well as some people in this room. All right. Well, you do accept, though, and you say that there's a suspicion. Do you accept that it's well-grounded? That was Mr. Johnson's view.
I can't speak to analysis made by others. I certainly, and again, distinguishing what I knew in 2019 from what I may have learned later leaves me in an awkward position around answering this.
All right. I'll move to my next document, and that is CAN 15842, please. and you've seen this already, it is the late October 2022 briefing. You've already given the document. Scrolling down a little further, there we are, thank you. My question for you is, did the director say words to the effect of, or convey the message that, as you see here, Canada has been slower than our Five Eyes allies to respond to the foreign interference threat?
No.
All right. And if you continue on in that same passage, such as proactively publicizing successful disruption activities, was that something that the director conveyed to you?
No, when I spoke, briefing notes prepared for the director didn't particularly align with the actual briefing we got.
Yes.
The briefing was spent almost entirely on specific cases, and all of these notes prepared for the director, generally saying, yes, foreign interference is serious, India, China, serious, would have taken up the first. He would have gotten right into the cases. So this is not.
I'm just going to show you one more point from this. I do have your point. Yes, thank you. Yes, it's the bullet point. Are able to conduct foreign interference successfully in Canada because there are no consequences, either legal or political. Foreign interference is therefore a low risk and high reward endeavor. Did the director convey, in those words or in some similar words, that message that this is a low risk, high reward endeavor because there are no consequences?
No.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you. Counsel for Jenny Kwan.
Minister, good afternoon. So, Prime Minister, it's a matter of public record that MP Kwan has alleged that she may have been the target of foreign interference by the Communist Party of China in the 2021 general election. And so based on that premise, there's time permitting, there's three sets. The first is how MP Kwan thesis that she was a target for foreign interference. The second is why she might be a target. And the third is how foreign interference might be occurring against her in Canada. So you're aware, Prime Minister, that MP Kwan received a confidential briefing from CSIS on May 26, 2023.
Yes.
And you're aware that she's not shared publicly any of the classified information she received in that briefing.
I believe that to be correct, yes.
But you're aware she stated that she was told that she is an evergreen target for the Communist Party of China and for the rest of her life, even after she leaves politics.
I can't speak to directly what she was told, but that seems consistent with what they might have told her, yes.
So Prime Minister, are you able in this setting to share with us whether you had any role in the decision to brief MP Kwan about foreign interference?
When there are allegations or information brought to me regarding a particular member of parliament or a particular individual, often one of our first responses in my office, my response, is to ask CSIS or the security agency involved to engage directly with the individual. The nature of that engagement, do that, sometimes us encouraging it allows But I believe in this case, we encouraged those briefings to happen.
And so you encourage them to happen. And if you're able to comment, was one of the reasons why to happen was to enable MP Kwan to herself identify foreign interference that might be occurring and to take steps, if she could, to counter foreign interference?
The challenge of foreign interference exists for, as we've heard, for just about every elected official at every different order of government as a potential threat. But we also know that diaspora communities, particularly from certain countries of origin, are more susceptible to be targets on that. So whether it's defensive briefings or threat reduction measures, which are two different approaches that CSIS and others can use in terms of briefing, they are designed to both inform, make aware, and hopefully help the individual in avoiding concern.
And so one goal is to help individuals avoid foreign interference if it's occurring. So a self-help remedy, if we could, urge an individual to come forth with concerns, or the RCMP or the Commissioner of Canada. And of course, for anyone to come forward, a member of Parliament or any Canadian who might be targeted for foreign interference, the expectation would be that if they presented such a complaint or a concern, that it would be investigated thoroughly.
That it would be given the attention that it merits, yes.
Okay. And dig in a bit to why MP Kwan might have been targeted and what your thoughts are. So you're aware that MP Kwan has testified here that she believes she's been targeted for foreign interference because of her outspoken criticism over many years of the human rights record of the People's Republic of China. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Yeah, and so you're aware of her criticisms of the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Yes.
And the Hong Kong national security law.
Yes, like many Canadians of all different origins, but particularly progressive Canadians of Chinese origin, there are some very strong and outspoken and brave individuals who speak up against the government of their country of origin.
And she made some of those criticisms as a parliamentarian on the floor of the House of Commons.
Yes.
So, for example, when she spoke in favor of and voted in favor of the resolution on the Uyghur genocide. And so it's clear then in making these criticisms and that she was exercising her parliamentary. And no Canadian.
And I'd also say more, she was fulfilling her responsibilities as a member of Parliament to represent her constituents and her community in our Parliament.
Agreed. And that no Canadian, MP or not, should be subject to foreign interference for expressing their political views.
Indeed, yes.
So I want to then take you if I may, Prime Minister, to how foreign interference by the CCP might be occurring in Canada. And so we've had testimony activities occur through the United Front. Communist Party, you're aware of that?
Not exclusively.
Right, but including through the United Front.
Yes, there are many different ways, and the United Front is one of the ways in which the Communist Party of China exerts either influence or perhaps in other cases.
Able to comment on the other ways?
Are a perfect example of something has been in the news recently that our friend from the block asked about earlier today.
And of course, and the United Front often operates through proxies, we've learned. You agree that that's correct?
Yes.
And I think the words you used to describe foreign interference in your examination in chief were covert, coercive, might funnel funds to Chinese proxies in Canada.
I am wary of getting into too much of what I know in an open forum here, but I think there's been evidence submitted along the lines of that.
Okay, and so it has confirmed that the United Front uses proxies to
encourage you to go directly to the source of these reports and allegations. I can say that, yes, I am kept very, very highly briefed on various ways of interference. I'm not always sure which ones I can talk about that talking about public record things, and it's good that you're putting.
Of course, part of some of the rituals of Canadian political life involve attending events hosted by different ethnic communities that are potentially quite significant. So Vaisakhi would be one I'm sure that you might be familiar with.
Yes.
And so there is a certain significance then to having been invited for many years to an event and then suddenly disinvited in a public way. That would be designed to send a message. Wouldn't you agree?
I think publicly disinviting someone as wrong as it would be might fall into the category of influence rather than interference. If a diplomat is hosting an event that the Chinese government is behind or through with proxies, it's a fairly open and visible way, and perhaps meant to be open and visible, to exclude an individual. That unfortunate, or much as we might disagree with it, it sounds like surreptitious, but more here, but I understand your point that it is unfortunate that China in general tries to silence critics of its regime, including high-profile members of parliament.
Okay, so a couple of concluding questions, if I may, Prime Minister. So the GAC panel testified that if the People's Republic of China, or for that matter any other foreign state, were engaged in foreign interference in Canada, it would violate international law. Do you have any reason to disagree?
I am, yes, the foreign interference is violation of Canadian law and international law.
And you'd agree then it's a violation of Canadian sovereignty?
Yes.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Jarman, representing a Renault Tool.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Or thank you, Commissioner. Prime Minister, my name is Tom Jarman. I represent Aaron O'Toole. Just building on a question that my colleague was asking, Mr. O'Toole, similar to Ms. Kwan, has also received a defensive briefing from CSIS. And was that done with the permission or direction of your office?
Again, it is not something that CSIS needs to get permission from the Prime Minister's office to do. But in this case, we certainly encouraged it.
MPs come under this sort of, they should be made aware of that?
That is in general.
Your office given direction to that effect?
Threat reduction or defensive briefings it gives or doesn't give, but certainly our posture has been one of encouraging CSIS to keep all parliamentarians informed and aware of not just threats against them, but of issues of foreign interference.
Okay, thank you. I guess if I could go to CAN 4495. And this is a document that's supposed to sometime in late February of 2023. It was prepared by CSIS. Commission counsel shown it to you, and I believe you also saw it during your witness interview. If you could scroll down to the third page. A little further, please. Thank you very much. Oops, back up, please. Thank you. So I understand from your witness interview that you were not advised of these events concurrent to them happening in the election in 2021. But I would ask, after February 21st of 2023, have you ever been briefed by either CSIS or the NSIA with respect to conclusions similar to this that were observed online and media activities aimed at discouraging Canadians, particularly Chinese heritage, from supporting the Conservative Party of Canada leader Aaron O'Toole, and particularly Steveston, Richmond East, Kenny Chu? The timing of the efforts to align with Conservative polling improvements, similarities in language with articles published by agreements between these Canada-based outlets and PRC entities.
I believe
I think it's 66.
Not the interview summaries, the prepared summaries. Redactors.
Madam Commissioner, I think the Prime Minister is referring to the multi-source topical summary.
That one. Topical summaries, yes. She.
I believe it's number 4, if that assists, dot 4.
We just scroll down.
I have that one.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's it.
So that's a topical summary, but going back to my question, which was, has any official, either the NSIA or the director of CSIS or anyone on your staff, briefed you with respect to the conclusions that were in CAN 4495?
And just to be fair to the witness, perhaps he could be allowed to look at those conclusions one by one rather than in a mass.
Or possibly you can go back to CAN 4495 then.
Yes, I have the summary, so if we can go back on the page to the document you brought up.
Thank you. Scroll down, thank you. Further. Overall statement is observed online and media activities aimed.
Yeah, what I would go to is the bottom of that, the last line in the second paragraph there, and refer to the general summary there, point 6, that says, no PRC state direction of the incident was detected or reported.
Yes, I realize that's what that document says. My question is, did anyone brief you with respect to those allegations that are in CAN 4495? And your answer is no, that's fine.
First of all, these are briefing notes that I never saw. These are briefings for a briefer who then gave a briefing that, as we've seen, may or may not have included all of these things. I am and was, however, aware of the elements in the summary that talked about whether it's following the publication of the article in the Hill Times. There was a number of different media organizations that picked up and ran with those things. But again, getting to the bottom line that no Chinese state direction of the incident was detected or reported.
Thank you. And I'd like to turn now to COM 008, which is the cabinet directive from 2021 with respect to their critical election incident public protocol. And this is the standing directive right now. It is, unlike 2019, this is an ongoing thing. Is that correct?
Yes, this is the existing directive.
Intervention by the panel of 5 would either be high, used, observed with certainty, and Mr. LeBlanc used the high threshold as well. Is that consistent with your understanding of how the directive is meant to apply?
The directive is meant to apply and the panel is meant to kick in when there are threats to Canada being able to hold a free and fair election. Threshold, because just the act of engaging for the panel could itself have an impact on the unfolding of the election. So the expertise and the experience and the professional judgment of the people on the panel is what we lean on significantly for whether and how they intervene. I will highlight that not every intervention by the P5 would be to convene a supper-hour press conference to tell Canadians about something in the middle of an election campaign. It could involve, as it has, apprising different parties of concerns. It could involve asking or working with a social media giant to take down a particular piece of misinformation. Like, there are different things that we are to do to ensure that the election remains free and fair for Canadians.
Possibly, can we scroll down in the directive itself, please? And into 5. There we are, the process. Actually, I'm sorry, I have to go back up again. So they say, paragraph 3, please. You say, Minister, or Prime Minister rather, that this can be engaged by threats. The panel of 5 has testified that it must be an event, free and fair election, at which they would give no. Is your evidence that the panel can act on?
Ask actually to scroll down to. Go to 4.0 or, no, next one, 5.0. There we go. Lays out a process through which threatens Canada's ability to have a free and fair election should notification be necessary. I suppose an incident could be an event, but I think if there is an imminent threat to Canada's ability to have free and fair election, I have no doubt that the panel would engage with that, whether or not the incident or event had happened or was just imminently about to happen.
And just one last question, please, Commissioner. And that threat crystallize at the general election level, at the riding level, or indeed among a diaspora community level that's spread out over across several ridings.
Sorry, and what's your question?
That threat could crystallize
yes.
at either the general election level, an individual riding level, or among a broader community that's spread out over several ridings.
Yes, as long as it threatens Canada's ability to have a free and fair election, either at the riding level or in the aggregate general election, which is just the sum of 338 individual riding elections.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Tom.
Acting on behalf of the Conservative Party.
Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. Could I have, just give me a moment, could I have TRN 6 called up, please? And while that's being called up, Mr. Prime Minister, in preparation for your testimony here today, have you been aware that he spoke to PRC officials on multiple occasions about the two Michaels while they were held in captivity in China?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And am I correct that the two Michaels had been taken into custody and detained in China commencing in December 2018 until they were released at the end of September 2021?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me that the detention of the two Michaels was a very high-profile and very sensitive matter, both in Canada and abroad?
It was certainly very high profile, and it was a detention that caused us to mobilize broadly. It was certainly a very difficult experience for the two Michaels and their families, but it was also something that mobilized an awful lot of not just Canadians, but our partners around the world.
Thank you. We've heard evidence and seen evidence in this inquiry that at least one of the General Consul General in I have a couple of questions for you regarding
Happy to hear from him about that. I would urge him to refer to the summary, the topical summary on this issue.
I'm going to come to the topical summary, but if I could ask the Prime Minister generally, Mr. Dong had been having conversations with the PRC.
I can't recall offhand at what point that was.
Do you remember what year, sir?
Perhaps there's documents that refer to the meeting that I can talk about publicly, the various briefings that I've had when these allegations came out. I believe this was the source, this was a matter disclosed in the leaks in the fall of 2022, and it was only subsequent to those leaks that I became aware of those conversations. So it would have been late in 2022.
You don't believe you were made aware of any such conversations prior to then?
No.
Okay. And could I ask that can some two be called up, please? And I believe Ms. Chowdhury took you through this document to some extent earlier. This is a summary of intelligence held by CSIS and the intelligence agencies relating to Han Dong and his communications with the People's Republic of China. relating to the two Michaels, and I take it from your answers earlier, you reviewed this document in preparation for your testimony. There's a summary of 5 points. Can you confirm, and I think you may have, in preparation for today, you have received
I have 6 points on mine.
I may have misspoken. You're correct, quite correct. 6 points.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Can I turn? Perhaps you can review that. And while you are, the second sentence says the PRC released the two Michaels at that moment. Opposition parties would view the PRC's Canadian approach to the PRC. See that?
Yes.
When were you first made aware of MP Dong expressing this view?
As I said, this was subsequent to leaks. But let me also just say that it's aware of information alleging that MP Dong expressed this view. As has been previously stated, there have been significant questions around both translation and summary of the actual exchange that, you know, I don't think I need to read the first page filled with caveats around incomplete, single-sourced, varying degrees of reliability, you know, not necessarily indicating corroboration or reliability of sources. So there's a lot of uncertainty around even the things that we're saying in the summary, that we're seeing in the summaries.
Can I ask you, Prime Minister, have you personally reviewed that summary?
This summary?
No, the summary.
Madam Commissioner, I'm concerned that we're not sure.
I can say yes to that, though. Yes, I have personally done that. But there's not much more I can say about it.
That's fine, thank you. Can we call up COM 118, which is the Special Rapporteur's first report that was produced or dated May 23, 2023?
COM 118?
Yes.
Just a minute.
And if I'd like to go to page 26, small Roman numeral 8. There's an analysis of a piece of reporting that Han Dong advised the PRC consulate to extend the detention of the two Michaels, Global News, March 22, 2023. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and immediately below that, Mr. Johnston comments on how there has been considerable media attention about an alleged transcript of this conversation. You see that?
Yes.
And he then says, I have reviewed the same intelligence report that was provided to the Prime Minister relating to this allegation, which I am advised is the only intelligence that speaks to this issue. I can report the following, and we're going to come to the following. My question now, though, is, Mr. Johnson tells us that he reviewed the same intelligence report that you did, and that this is the only report that exists that speaks to this issue. So my question for you is the following. Is the intelligence report that Mr. Johnson is referring to that we just looked at, or is it something else?
I'm not sure the witness can answer that in this setting.
Okay. And are there, for now we'll go with written reports, either hard copy or electronic, that you're aware of that perhaps were not shared with Mr. Johnson that might relate to precisely what was or wasn't said the PRC official?
I'm not certain I can answer that question.
For the same reasons?
For reasons of security and confidentiality.
Thank you.
National security.
Thank you. Have those reports, if there are any such reports, have they been provided to the present commission?
I'm not sure I cannot confirm or infirm the existence of any other reports that I cannot speak to here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnson then gives his assessment of that particular allegation as follows. He says, the allegation is false. Mr. Dong discussed the two Michaels with a PRC official, but then their detention. The allegation that he did make that suggestion has had a very adverse effect. Do you agree with that assessment, sir?
Yes, we know that the media reports and the allegations made in rather a spectacular fashion about Mr. Dong were false.
Okay, but would you agree
in regards to what he said or didn't say about the two Michaels?
Okay, would you agree with me, sir, that all that Mr. Johnson was commenting on was what is contained in that heading, that particular allegation? Mr. Johnson didn't comment one way or the other about whether what else Mr. Dong might have said to the PRC counsel, read the two in Can Some 02, the differently.
I'm not sure the witness can comment on what Mr. Johnson was or was not commenting on.
Mr. Prime Minister, I have very many more questions, as you might imagine, but I simply don't have the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. De Luca. Counsel for Andang.
Thank you, Commissioner. Prime Minister, I'm Mark Pauley, and as you heard, I represent Handong. I'm going to start with the same issue that Mr. De Luca finished with, and that is the allegations that were made in the newspaper, in Global at least, relating to the two Michaels. And we, as you know, we heard yesterday from Mr. Clow, among others, and Mr. Clow told us about how after the leaks came out, there were discussions about what to do, how to respond, whether there could be any response. And in particular, he said there were a number of discussions about how to get the truth out that the story was wrong. And he explained that up until yesterday, he was not able to say that publicly. Are you able to, first of all, tell us, did you have conversations like that as well about whether there was anything the government could do, whether anything you could do?
Well, further, what we actually rapporteur who had the opportunity to quite categorically that the allegation the special rapporteur those allegations as false was perhaps more reassuring to concerned Canadians than having official party as Mr. Dong category.
Does that, well, aside from Mr. Clow, have discussions about whether there was anything that could be released before that, like immediately to respond?
There were many discussions following the leaks on this issue, but on a number of the issues that were leaking, as we highlighted and attempted to highlight a few times in the media. There were clear falsehoods and inaccuracies in the media reporting, but the challenge of protecting national security meant that we were very much limited in our ability to contradict the false allegations being made by the leaker.
And that, that difficulty you're describing, although we've heard, as I say, Mr. Clow talk about finally being able to say something publicly yesterday, but I take it that same tension continues that you're able to say.
But, you know, given, as Mr. Clow pointed out yesterday, we are now in a position to express and to repeat that the way it was characterized in the media.
So let me, the ongoing discussion about buses. We heard about you being briefed by Mr. Broadhurst in September 2019, and you talked about him flagging concerns and describing this scenario of students being brought to Don Valley North nomination meeting. And you asked whether the intelligence agency understood this thing that busing people to nomination meetings is standard, or I think you said regular earlier. Is that right?
Yes.
And
It will be your last question.
thank you. And you, sorry, let me make sure. And you raised the issue of whether the intelligence agency understood this basic issue that someone like you who knows politics and nomination campaigns knows. And did you figure out an answer to that, whether the people at the agency who were reporting this had that context?
Oh, certainly. Listen, our intelligence agencies, even though they don't organize nomination meetings themselves as political parties do, regularly turn to experts and learn about the things that they don't know about when they need to. So I am very confident that our intelligence agencies now know a lot more about the unfolding of nominations, which is important because they need to be able to ensure that those nominations, like all electoral events, by the residents and indeed by are free and fair and absent interference by foreign actors.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Human Rights Coalition.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Teach, and as the Commissioner stated, I'm representing the Human Rights Coalition. I understand, Mr. Prime Minister, that you have a lot of confidence in your NSIA's ability to receive information from the national security agencies. But I want to ask about your level of confidence in the agency's abilities to receive information from those most vulnerable, namely members of targeted diaspora communities. So let me just start with this. Were you aware, Mr. Prime Minister, that the RCMP's National Security Information Network is only available in English and French?
I was not.
Were you aware that the CSE's online reporting tool, as well as CSIS's reporting tool, and the OCCE's complaints form on the website are also available in only English and French?
But I am also aware that all those agencies use in language individuals who are able to read. I take your word for it that the online forms are only in English and French.
I appreciate that. And we also heard on March 27th with the Diaspora panel, that was the first day of these hearings, that community members oftentimes don't feel empowered to reach out to the agencies. They feel that they won't be heard. They feel it's a waste of time for whatever reason. How can you expect the agencies themselves to really know, and therefore how can you expect the NSIA to of diaspora community members is happening, including in the context of elections?
this is certainly a challenge, and it is something that we've been working on over the past years to try and improve and increase not just the diversity within our various agencies, but also the ability of who are often most vulnerable to interference, particularly in diaspora communities, but also at the same time, often with good reason, most suspicious of authorities and enforcement agencies that have not always treated them fairly in the past.
Thank you. Given these limitations, does this plant even a seed of doubt in your mind in terms of the integrity of the 2019 and 2021 general elections?
I think those are two different things. The challenge of any democracy is ensuring that people who perhaps disagree with the outcome of a given election still have faith that that is indeed the will of the people, the will of citizens. And that's where having a panel in place, both in 2019 and 2021, that could say that the election was free and fair is a really important expanded and become more, perhaps more sensitive or alert to various vulnerabilities that are more difficult to go into, particularly. So there is more to do, but I do have confidence in the ability of our intelligence agencies and our panel to have drawn the conclusion that the elections in 2019 and in 2021 were indeed free and fair.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doody for the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Or, yes. No, it's the Sikh coalition, I'm sorry. You'll be next.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Trudeau. My name is Prabjot Singh. I'm appearing on behalf of the Sikh coalition. So I don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to start by asking whether you would agree that your government missed key opportunities to hold India to account for its interference in Canada, and to be more specific, so we can narrow down a concise answer, that there were attempts made by the government to minimize the threat. Assessment?
No.
5-5. By your government in the hopes of creating some oversight and transparency on security and intelligence issues. Mr. Operator, if we can go to page 73 of the PDF. So as you know, this report deals with concerns about foreign interference. Is that 73 of the PDF? Or yeah, 55 of the actual document. And so this is a section that deals with foreign interference specifically. And if we can continue to scroll down until 79, please. You can go a little bit faster. And so right there, if you can hold for a second, if you scroll up, please. So there is mention specifically of foreign interference by the People's Republic of China, and continue scrolling. There's mention of the Russian Federation, and if we can pause right there, and it specifically says other states engaged in foreign interference, and if you continue scrolling, that entire section has been redacted. Mr. Operator, if we can go to page 108 of the PDF. And if you continue scrolling until 113, you see these are instances of Canada's response to foreign interference in relation to China, of a response to Russian interference. And if we scroll down, is redacted. So, Mr. Trudeau, I'm going of this report outline details of Indian electoral interference, as well as outlining governmental failure. So I understand that you may not be able to address this in a public setting for national security reasons, and if that's the case, you can indicate that to the Commissioner. So can you confirm that that is the substance that's been redacted in this report?
Obviously, in a public setting, I can't speak to redactions made for national security, but I will say that the principle anywhere in the world has all the rights of a Canadian to be free from extortion, coercion, interference from a country that they left behind. And how we have stood up for Canadians, including in the very serious case that I brought forward to Parliament of the killing of Nijjar, demonstrates our government's commitment to defending the rights and freedoms of Canadians, for whom, which are the reasons for which so many people crossed oceans and continents to come live in this country and build this country. And the suggestion that we can to defend Canadian rules and values and defend Canadians from foreign interference is simply.
But I do want to confirm that it was you that approved the redactions in this report. Is that correct? Based on suggestions from public servants that you received.
Redactions are made by professional public servants, and we sign off on them, but we do not modify them.
You do have the possibility to push back against excessive
made by professional public servants, not by the political wing.
And does the Prime Minister have the authority to push back on the suggestions that are made in cases where there may be excessive redactions?
That gets into the entire question of declassification of information, and in the American system, in ways that are not replicated in our system here in Canada.
So just very simply, I have one last question I want to ask after this. Does the Prime Minister have the authority and the ability to push back against those suggestions when there's excessive redaction?
The Prime Minister has an ability to engage in discussions and ask for reasons. But like I said, as Prime Minister and as a government, our habit and our approach has always been to allow the professional public service to make determinations around what needs to be redacted in the name of national security and confidentiality.
Madam Commissioner, I have one final question, if that's okay.
Very quick.
Sure. I think you would agree that the lack of meaningful steps to expose and stop foreign interference activities when they first arise, including deliberate actions to redact any failures that may have been included in the NSIA COP report, could play a role in India's increasingly aggressive interference and repression activities over this period, effectively and failing to bring the threat of Indian foreign interference to Canadians' attention earlier. Is that correct?
I think that's certainly a question one needs to ask of the previous Conservative government that was known for its very cozy relationship with the current Indian government, whereas our government has always stood up to defend minorities in Canada and the rights of minorities to speak out, even if it irritates their home countries overseas.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
So, Mr. Doody, it's your turn.
Good evening, Prime Minister. It's John Doody. I'm counsel for the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. We've heard that Russia's foreign interference activities in foreign elections was the catalyst for the plan to protect Canada's democracy, and that Russia was a foreign nation that the Canadian government was concerned could potentially interfere in Canadian elections, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We've also heard from the site task force and the panel of 5 that neither identified any foreign interference activity by Russia in either the 2019 or the 21 general election. It would seem possible that Russia was not interested in interfering with Canadian elections in those years, or equally possible that they did and the Canadian government failed to detect it. Would you agree that it's possible that Russia interfered in one or both the elections and the Canadian government simply failed to notice it?
I would highlight that, of course, it is always possible that the entire body of our national security intelligence agencies are very sophisticated cyber and security communications established did absolutely nothing or that would be very wary about saying that, oh, you know, despite the fact you didn't find any evidence of it, it still might have happened. I think we have seen the extent to which Russia is engaged in misinformation, disinformation, and actions of sowing chaos and destabilizing democracies around the world, including attempts at cyber attacks and successful cyber attacks in Canada. But I think one of the big differences between Russia and a number of other hostile or challenging state of a critical mass of either Russian diaspora or Russian speakers in Canada, as you contrast with the situation in Ukraine or in Latvia or elsewhere where there is an easier threshold for them to interfere in democratic processes.
You spoke about the need for Canadians to be confident that the government is doing what it can to keep Canadians safe. How confident are you that Russia did not interfere with either election?
We know Russia is responsible for significant amounts of propaganda, of misinformation, of disinformation, and certainly attempts at interference are no doubt ongoing from Russia. They are a hostile actor, hostile to Canada, hostile to our values, hostile to our support of Ukraine, and hostile to our democracy. But to say, to reach the belief that Russia posed a integrity of our elections to the outcome of determined.
And finally, would you expect members of the Canadian-Ukrainian community to have a high level of confidence in that conclusion as well?
Yes, I think the Canadian-Ukrainian community degree of confidence in the conclusions by all of our national security experts and top public servants that the elections in 2019 and 2021 are free and fair. At the same time, I think Ukrainian Canadians, like all Canadians, need to remain vigilant to Russian disinformation and to the amplification of pro-Russian narratives in contexts and coming from places that one wouldn't suspect pro-Russian narratives to be amplified. I'm very pleased to see that Ukraine just passed the updated over the past days, and I continue to be bewildered at the fact that the Conservative Party voted against that update because they fell prey to pro-Russian narratives that are undermining Canada's support for Ukraine amongst Conservative Canadians, which I know is a thing of deep distress for many Ukrainian Canadians, and rightly so.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Metzirois for the RCDA, Russian-Canadian Democratic Alliance.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. Hello, Madam Commissioner. I am representing the Russian-Canadian Alliance. We have heard that some disinformation campaigns could have affected some political parties in the 2021 elections. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I want to remove politics about this, and I want to talk about disinformation. Mr. Indicate that the conclusion from our national security of ensuring the integrity of our elections, well, they agreed that there was no impact in the results due to foreign interference, whether it's in the different counties or in the general elections at large. So yes, there were attempts to interfere, but our elections the integrity of our elections stood firm. Question. I want to ask if that kind of attempt affected just one party, or could it affect all parties, leaders of all parties, like the Liberal Party and the others? Answer. Well, interference can affect just one party, all parties, or a few parties. It can also affect the country of origin, the county, and the region as well. Question. Did you witness this as some leader of the Liberal parties during the 2021 and 2019 elections? Answer. In my capacity as a party leader, I was supposed to campaign, speak to as many Canadians as possible, and ensure that as many Liberal members are elected as possible, to ensure that the integrity of the elections stood firm, and they concluded that in both elections, 2021 and 2019, these elections were free and fair. With your own ears and saw with your own eyes, did campaigns? Answer. Well, quite widespread, more in 2021 than in 2019. We saw conspiracy theories with respect to vaccination. We also witnessed conspiracy theories about the World Economic Forum, and even personal attacks against me and my family. So yes, there was misinformation and disinformation during those campaigns. Question. Well, it can't be easy, especially when it affects your family. But my question is, you understand how social media works, so you did your campaign in 2015 thanks to social media. I'm sure it was very helpful in that campaign. I want to know whether there were some disinformation campaigns that were more important, and do you think that it impacted voters during those two campaigns? Answer. Well, every political party was using social media to try and garner votes. So, of course, social media played an important role in those elections. Question, I was talking about disinformation campaigns, wondering if you know whether we can influence voters in that regard. Answer, I think we can see that disinformation and misinformation impacts several people. There are thousands of Canadians who believed that vaccination was more dangerous than COVID-19 itself. That is an example of people who were affected, sometimes fatally, by disinformation. Mr. Tira, you have a last question? This is my last question. I want to know if you witnessed disinformation that could, if you had witnessed this, why didn't you raise this issue with government institutions, those who are mandated and authorized to act on these misinformation and disinformation campaigns, especially when it affects the integrity of elections? Answer, because those institutions, and I speak regularly about this with my national security advisors about the impact of misinformation and disinformation. We can see, let's remember the situation that happened with the convoys in Ottawa to understand that it's a real situation, but it's not up to me to tell the panels that you have to be wary of disinformation and misinformation. It's part of their job to ensure that the elections keep their integrity, and they did a good job in 2019 and 2021, and we understand that in 2025 it will be even more difficult, and they have to keep doing the excellent job.
One last question, if I may. If you, as the party leader, you're in an election campaign and you see serious interference, false information, would you report that? Is Elections Canada doing its work? I trust that they will do their work, but it is part of our responsibility, all of us, whether we're citizens, candidates, party leaders, or political parties. We all need to work with the site task force to report any misinformation or disinformation. And this is part of what we're going to do with the panel. We will raise issues with the panel, but the panel does not depend on us to do its work. But yes, absolutely, we can contribute, and we should.